Having proven an audience for the adult drama with the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo adaptation, come 2014 we would see another dark thriller being adapted by David Fincher with Gone Girl. The script itself having already been circulated around, with Reese Witherspoon originally wanting to play the title of Gone Girl, Amy, when the film was originally picked up for adaptation when a manuscript of her novel was passed around in 2011. With Fincher now having already proven himself not only as an industry name, but also as a person well capable of directing such dark thrillers, there was much excitement obviously going into this film, especially with Flynn's novel having received such rave reviews. But with a cast so eclectic that included both Ben Affleck, Rosamund Pike, as well as comedy standouts such as Neil Patrick Harris, Tyler Perry, and Casey Wilson, would this be a film that would be able to live up to the dark roots of the novel? I'm Elwood.
I'm Kim.
And you're listening to Movies and Tea. Let's take it to the booth. Well, welcome everyone to the end of Movies and Tea.
The end of Movies and Tea? End of season 5 of Movies and Tea, maybe.
So yes, we're obviously wrapping up our David Fincher season tonight with Gone Girl, a film which I would say, out of all his filmography, this was the one which, when it was released, had more people wanting to talk about it than perhaps any other film in his filmography. And I think it was a real sort of sign of how far Fincher had come as a director when we look back at the early days of like Alien 3, where he's being chewed out by the studios, and then we've got Seven and Fight Club being these real sort of surprise breakout hits, and other films such as The Game sort of simmering under the surface on it to sort of later get that cult status. And now here with Gone Girl, we've got Fincher established as a powerhouse, and certainly someone capable of really creating films which are not only visually stunning but also tap into some of the darker recesses of the human psyche. I mean, Kim, going into Gone Girl, I mean, had you read the book prior to it? Because I went into this one blind on my initial watching of it, of course.
Oh, I am a mega Gillian Flynn fan. So at the point that this movie came out, I had already read all her 3 books. So big fan. And I mean, Gillian Flynn is a fantastic writer. So this book was actually, it's one of my favorite, even though it's the last book that she wrote. Well, it's the last book that she wrote because I don't think she wrote another book afterwards. But, yeah, I mean, it's a great story. I mean, Gone Girl, the way it was structured in the novel was kind of a little bit not sure how it would work in the spectrum of the whole, just in a movie, and how they were going to set it up to make it work. Luckily, I mean, in the hands of Fincher, I was really happy with how it turned out, because it was, if I remember correctly, and I haven't reread the book since, so I might be wrong. It's been a while. So I think that if it's fairly similar, but then they changed some of the things. I think one of the most notable changes is how Neil Patrick Harris meets his end. So yeah, that part was one of the changes that they had. But I mean, it all works really well in the spectrum of just like the movie itself, and how it's all set up, and how the thriller unravels itself, and how they portray the character of Nick and Amy and their relationship. I really think like the movie really worked, even though, I mean, obviously I think that with a movie like this, the question is always, if you've already read the book, you already know the twist. So will the twist still be able to get you, and how it's all set up? And I mean, I went to the theaters I think probably opening weekend or so, and I took my husband there, and the thing I wanted to see was how he would react to the twist. And that's the most important, that's like the most entertaining part, is watching like a twist that you think is going to be so mind-blowing, and then watching someone react to it. And in my mind, like, he reacted exactly like I thought. Like, he was like, oh shit, oh my god, type of deal. So it was
Oh, definitely so. And I think it's certainly in the hands of Fincher, it's almost like the film is split into 2 halves. We get, and this is all perfectly plays into the ultimate game that's being played here. And like yourself, I watched it by myself originally, and I showed it to my wife later, and it was sort of like you watching for that turning point moment where the big sort of twist comes, and you just looking at the person you wanting to see their reaction to it. And I think she more than delivered when she just proclaimed that bitch. We were watching it, and it's like, it was totally worth it. But yeah, I mean, obviously the script itself, it was adapted by Flynn, which is kind of unusual. I mean, normally when you have an author involved, they work on the initial draft, and then a more experienced screenplay writer will like sort of come in and polish it up. But as part of the deal for the option of the book, Flynn was sort of brought on to write the script as well, and this was her first attempt at screenwriting, and she basically tackled it by studying screenplay books and also meeting with Steve Kloves, who wrote the screenplays for the Harry Potter series. And throughout the sort of process, she would like write swathes of work, and then she would send them over to Fincher, and then they would go back and forth over phone conversations to rewrite scenes, often dozens of times, until they sort of tapped into the vision that Fincher had for the film. And I mean, this isn't a short book that we're talking about adapting. I mean, it's some 500 pages. So to hack that down, I mean, obviously there's parts of the book that haven't made it across, and Flynn herself basically said that she was never precious about cutting aspects of the book out. So there's aspects of this, such as flashbacks to Nick's mother. There's also the Desi's mother, who doesn't appear in the film, and there's also a lot of the parental sort of storylines that are lost in the process. And I think it really sort of streamlines the plot down to its sort of key characters to stop it from getting muddled and bring in other people's sort of viewpoints, which I think is so key to the film's effectiveness, is that we don't have too many viewpoints. We want to keep it on really essentially just two viewpoints. Mm-hmm. We want to have Nick's, and we want to have Amy's viewpoint, and I think that's where we get that wonderful divide in the film, where initially we're following Nick as he's trying to figure out what the hell's happened to his wife, and then we're following Amy as she basically reveals what she did and why she did it. So it's a very fascinating and very unique thriller, and one that it's I want to say it's different than what we've seen from Fincher, but at the same time you can see there's elements of his other thrillers within this film as well. So it was definitely a pleasant surprise when I saw this one for the first time.
I think with adaptations it's always like that. You always don't know what's going to happen, and I think that more people should be thinking about the whole asking the novelist who wrote the source material, if they're available, to write their screenplays, or at least participate in it, because I feel like it makes more sense, because they know the core concept of where the novel lies its most important things. Obviously, like you said, in this one they cut out a lot of the tangents and some of the other characters, and it really they really I think it feels like they sped up the ending a little bit. So they sped up, the second half of the movie itself, when we flip over to Amy's point of view and why she did it and all that stuff. You kind of feel like it's definitely less detailed than the book itself, but it's not a bad thing, because it gets everything, all the message that you want done, and just really highlights the type of character that Amy is. And this movie, in essence, and this whole story is really about the viewpoint of really these two characters, their mindset, where they're at, and this little, I guess, game that they're playing with each other, as they realize, obviously, when they realize that Nick realizes that he's part of this game that Amy set up, and kind of finds and kind of gathers himself back after the shock. So it's interesting. I wonder if the casting, you felt like it was good. Did you expect these people? I mean, would you have preferred Reese Witherspoon to Rosamund Pike? I mean, I wouldn't, but I mean, Rosamund Pike, I think, is just she's obviously I feel like less known, because she's been in say like things like I've seen her before in Pride and Prejudice, and then I think she was, I don't know, I think it was after this that she was in Jack Reacher.
Yes, she was in she was in Jack Reacher 2020, wasn't she? So she was also in Doom way back in 2005, but it was Die Another Day, which I remember first seeing her, because all the British press and all the press for showing the film and stuff were all like focusing on her being this posh Bond girl, and they were just like every time they were like talking about it, it was sort of like, oh yeah, she's the lay of Bond's life. And I'm thinking, well, that's sort of limiting her as an actress to really just sort of boil her down to this idea that she's, you know, she's just a posh lay. But I think with Rosamund Pike, she's very hard to sort of place where you're going to sort of put her, because as I said, she obviously has that sort of posh demeanour to her, and I think that certainly plays it well here, because she's obviously comes from well-to-do stock, so to speak. Her parents have created this whole legacy of books based around her called the Amazing Amy series, and as she points out early in the sort of scene, the fact that Amy in the books is always sort of one step ahead of her. The fact that she fails in volleyball, yet her fictional self makes varsity, and her parents seem to be like living this like almost fantasy life for their daughter through this fictional character. And in many ways, it feels like when we look at the scheme that she concocts herself, it's almost like Amy's trying to win one for herself. It's sort of like, oh, if Amazing Amy's so good, let's see her top this one. So yeah, I think Rosamund Pike is an absolutely fantastic for the role, especially for the character of Amy that is being sold here, because essentially when she's introduced, I mean, Nick is kind of like, you know, he's the bit of rough. He's writing for a men's magazine, and she sees potential in him to make her the ideal man for herself. And this sort of like comes into play in sort of like the second half of the film, which, you know, she talks about how she made all these changes to mold him, and it was ultimately life that got in the way of her plans, and that ended up with her being transplanted from New York and this sort of like privileged life living in the brownstone, to having to deal with suburban Missouri, which in many ways she kind of resents Nick for, the fact that she's had to give up on all these things, and by concocting this plot is her way of not only getting out but also getting revenge on what Nick has reduced her to being. And I think it's just, when you look at the complexity of her plot, what she like puts into this sort of scheme, it's just absolutely fascinating. And where normally we're sort of always sort of like one step behind the killer, the psychopath, whatever way you want to view her character as being, with Gone Girl, it sort of takes that unique angle of, okay, well, now we're going to try and play her at her own game. And I think that's where the film really gets interesting, when you bring in Tyler Perry's lawyer character, who's basically training Nick how to present himself to the media and to the police, and just basically play this completely different person that Amy is expecting him to be. But I mean, how did you find the character Tanner Bolt? I found him a very surprising sort of character, especially when he's introduced as like this sort of like a lawyer who can win the unwinnable cases. You expect him to be kind of more of a sleazy, more of a slime ball, but he's actually a very by the book and just knows how to play the system kind of lawyer, or attorney, shall I say.
He's kind of the likable guy, which is very different, because usually, like you said, like lawyers aren't exactly the likable characters.
No.
But Tanner Bolt is different. I thought his character was something of a breath of fresh air in this really like tense situation where all these characters are being so tense. There's this kind of like dark comedy element when Tanner Bolt comes in, and then his interaction with, you know, obviously like Nick, And the whole part where, you know, Nick is this awkward guy. He really doesn't know how to act in public, especially, like, showing that he's lost his wife. Kind of thing, like his wife has vanished and he's, like, being very awkward, which his sister points out, obviously, constantly. And Tanner Bolt is this character which transforms him, gives him this kind of a new idea of how to treat the situation, to kind of bring things back to his side, because it's kind of like, but I think for him, he also is enjoying this because this is like, I mean, at the end of the movie, he really says one thing, like they're really like messed up, pretty much. They're like the most messed up couple he's ever dealt with, or something like that. I forgot his exact line, but it was like he had all these one-liners that were truly entertaining to watch, and to watch and listen. Like, I don't think I think I've only seen Tyler Perry in maybe one or two other things, and I don't have a really great impression of him in anything else. But I mean, Tanner Bolt is definitely like one of those roles where it stands out so well. And in this type of movie, it's kind of like that character he really is kind of like, he doesn't, how do you say, like, he's a character where he really doesn't care about these things. He just wants to win the cases. He just wants to win the case. He wants to make him likable, and he's laughing through this situation, which obviously is really messed up. And he can't believe that this is happening, but somehow he's just like, okay, well, you know, cases, this is how you win them. You become a likable guy to the jury and the public, and then you just play the game properly, and you'll win the case. Type of deal, right? So he's just getting the job done.
Oh yeah, definitely. Tanner continuously has this detachment from the case. I mean, he has no sort of emotional connection to anyone involved in this case. I mean, you almost get the feeling that even if he loses the case, he still gets to go home at night. He's not going to prison. It's sort of like, it would just be, oh, well, that was a loss. But at the same time, with Tanner, he knows that it's not just about what happens in the courtroom. It's about knowing how to play all these other elements of the system, in particular the media. And we have that great scene where he's coaching Nick when he's going to go make the appearance on the Ellen Abbott show, who's like a talk show based on Nancy Grace. And he's there throwing peanuts at him in the hotel room. And he's like, I'm going to keep throwing nuts at you every time you screw up. And I just
gummy
love
bears,
those...
right? Gummy bears.
Oh, that's what it was. I just love the fact this is these like motivational things. And he never loses his cool, but he's someone who just knows how to play the system. He knows how people are going to react. And where most of the lawyers will be sort of more focused on like working the evidence or the angles, he just knows that, you know, cases are won before they even get into court, because it's all about the public perception. And that's what he spends most of his time changing with Nick, because when we see Nick, who's left to himself prior to like the arrival of Tanner on the scene, he's kind of a bit clueless. He sort of, you know, he's there smiling during the original appeal for help, and he's posing. He poses for a picture with one of these crazy local women who keeps offering to make him a Frito pie. And then when he like has double thoughts about it, she completely freaks out at him in like one of the more bizarre scenes. But the whole character of Nick Dunne, I think Ben Affleck just totally nails this character. So it feels like a character not too detached from himself as a person. I mean, he's this sort of down-to-earth guy who owns a bar with his sister. He's just, you know, he's just everyday sort of Joe who's just happened to be involved with this exceptional woman. And I think that again is also where Rosamund Pike really comes into play. I mean, you can see her being the sort of character that Amy is, and I think it's only sort of further emphasized like her sort of family background when you have the scene of Nick and her mother walk along the beach, and she's like got this disdain for all the locals, and like just the fact that she's being forced to hang around in this town, just to, you know, show the proper face and and that to try and get her daughter back. So
yeah, no, I mean Ben Affleck is just to go back to that. I mean, Ben Affleck was, I've never said this about any other movie in my life, but when I saw that Ben Affleck was casted, like before he was casted, I wanted Ben Affleck to be the character of Nick. Because I felt like, and I've never cared so much about Ben Affleck. Like, I don't watch a whole lot of Ben Affleck movies. I like the movies he directs. But, I mean, overall, this character really, like, you can see him when you're reading the book. Like, for me, when I was reading the book, it was a face of Ben Affleck that I saw. Picturing the scenes come to life, you know. That's what it is. So, to me, this adaptation worked was because this character of Nick was exactly how I imagined him to be. And Ben Affleck pulled it off, obviously, really, really well. And when you look at Rosamund Pike, I think it was a surprising choice for me initially, because obviously I'm not in the UK. I don't know her reputation or anything as much. I've only seen like 1 or 2 movies of her at that point when she was casted. And to me, I didn't feel like, you know, obviously that she would be casted in a movie like this. And yet, I think it was the surprise of her playing Amy so well, and such a complex role, and really delivering that really brings the character home, because Amy is just a pouch of, you know, like, she's a surprise. She's like a Jack in the Box or whatever, like those mystery boxes, right? You open and you don't know what you're gonna find. But like, she's such a, like Rosamund Pike really gives this character so much, and it has to do with the fact that you don't know how she's gonna act in this role. You don't know, like, you didn't expect her to play this role so well and have that depth to it, because Amy is all kinds of crazy. She's like just unimaginable how she does everything. And coming from me, who I've read this book before I went in, and I didn't reread it to go into the movie, so I left a little bit of, you know, like question marks, giving it some space to have its own reiteration, because I don't mind it not being adapted to the T, because I understand that movies need to have their elements that work better in movies than in books. But I mean, for me, Rosamund Pike is just, you know, she does Amy so well. And I really don't think, like, when you have a role like this, you wonder if you're able to ever have a role like this, which you can top it, because, I mean, Amy's such a well-written character. Like, I love it. Every single part of it I love. She's just messed up in the best way.
Well, she's also, normally when you have the character who sort of plans out a plot so meticulously as she does, and the fact that we get to see it, all the little details that she puts in, and then when her plan goes south, the fact she's able to come up with a completely new plan, like almost on the fly. She's like, almost feels like she's like 2 steps ahead. And this isn't even the first time that she's done this, as we find out that she accused another boyfriend of rape, and we find out that exactly all the little things that she did to sort of frame him. And it's so much funny that when she meets up with Desi, this person that says he's been kept on the leash by her for like the last 20 odd years, that she's presented with this life that she thinks that she wants, and it's only when Nick starts playing a game that she realizes no, she doesn't want this at all, and starts hatching this plot to really find a way back to Nick, and at the cost of sacrificing Desi. And I have to say that when we look at the character Desi, he almost feels like the male counterpart to Amy. They're very similar in many ways. The fact that both are trying to are sort of responsible for manipulating people they like into becoming the vision of that person that they like, so that when he's at a guest house, he's buying her like clothes and jewelry and hair dye and all these things, so he can get her changed back into the Amy that he remembers. And I thought that was really sort of interesting, the fact that she's pulled this plot herself, and now she's having the same thing pulled on herself.
Yeah, I mean, Desi's character is really interesting as well. I mean, he is like, I didn't really see him as as the counterpart, but now I see it. It's a really good point. And I think it's just the point that he grew into that role. Because I think when the beginning of them being together, like the 20 years that he's been on this leash, and apparently with a restraining, didn't he have a restraining order? That he's still so, he's kind of in love with a fantasy, right? He's in love with this person. It's like you never let go of your first love type of deal. And he's turned, I think this whole desire and the years of wanting this person has turned him into a manipulative person, because now he has the means to be like, to hold her down, because he knows that she desperately needs somewhere to go. And he's playing it so that he's going to be her protection. And you can see those little looks that he gives when he notices how she's still really interested in watching how Nick is going to react to the situation on, like, when she's watching TV of him, like, in interviews and whatever. And you see this little thing, and he's trying to craft her into this person, just like she tries to craft Nick. And the whole situation with this is people who like to control don't like to be controlled, right?
Yeah.
So Amy needs to seek an out, because obviously at this point she has no money, she has nothing left, but the only thing she can do is find some drastic way to leave, because she is not going to be controlled. She doesn't want to be part of a relationship where she has no control over, and this person is not who she wants to change. And that's why she would go back to Nick, a person that pretty much she hatched the entire revenge on. I mean, she was angry with him about all these flaws that he has, that she's willing to forgive, I guess, in a certain way, as long as he stayed by her side and kind of like just trapped him by her side.
Well, I mean, the whole plot really that she hatches against Nick just basically comes out from the fact that she finds out he's been sleeping with one of his students, and that she's obviously not, she's feeling underappreciated for turning him into the man that he is compared to who he was.
But I think it's Nick's character is kind of unlikable. As you see him go through the interactions in the beginning, you really feel like he's kind of a loser. Because you can see Amy suffers the same things as he does, but she is rock hard. Like, she doesn't, everything that happens to her is things that Nick makes a decision to do. So moving to suburban Missouri was because his family had issues and he uprooted them without discussing with her, type of deal. And things like that happened. And when he loses his job, he doesn't know how to be unemployed, so he just plays video games all the time and whatever, right? He just does he spends a lot of money, and all these things kind of pile up as she sees this person that she's worked so hard to build into a better person kind of revert back to this loser that she first met, that she thought she can control. And he's not coming back now, because with the recession and being moved to suburban Missouri, she doesn't have anything now. She has nothing except for her trust fund. And when, in need, they have this whole conversation about how the turning point is when she doesn't discuss something with him, and she lends all her, the majority of her trust fund to her own parents in emergency. And it's just, to her, it's really like Nick is this person who relies on her for money, because he doesn't have any either, but she does. And he doesn't work hard for his life, type of thing. He doesn't work hard in hard times, I guess. So, I mean, when she has that huge monologue and she's driving down the road after we realize that this whole plot is her plot, type of thing, as a revenge plot, she ends the whole thing with, grown-up work for things, grown-ups pay, and grown-ups suffer consequences. And,
the cool girl monologue is just so fantastic, and I think that's where Rosamund Pike really sort of shines, because before, up until this point, she's like, she's just the pretty posh girl, and it's sort of like she's there doing the proper appearances and stuff. And then when we find out with the cool girl monologue, we find out, no, this is what the real personality of Amy is. And it's kind of funny that you see this, and he obviously points out this thing, so that when Nick is on to be giving his impassioned speech, he's apologizing for his affairs and basically saying that selling this idea to Amy that, you know, he's so grateful of what she did for him, that how she turned him, because she knows that by appealing to her ego, that's going to be the way to sort of lure her out of hiding. And I think that's also at the point where she turns on Desi, because she seems pretty set on that point and hiding out with Desi, who's able to provide her with a rich life. I mean, everything about Desi is just all about this idea that money and material possessions make the man. He's sort of like, when you give the guided tour of his lake house, and it's sort of like, oh yeah, we've got the shower which has got the steam setting, we've got the bathtub which has got the jacuzzi setting, we've got the bed which has got the posh sheets and stuff, and it's all these material things. It's like a Bret Easton Ellis novel, how obsessed he is with all the materialistic possessions of his property, and these are all the things that she believes that she's deserving and needing, and now Desi can obviously provide her with, compared to that sort of trailer lifestyle she was leading to previously. So,
I mean, Desi's character is really, I guess, shorter than you'd imagine it to be, but it also has this power of just delivers this purpose of why it's there, so that we kind of have this motive for her to find a way to exit and show how, you know, the extremes that she'd go to escape this, and the little plans she has, even in a trap, like as she's trapped under surveillance in this rich house, the things she gives up, that Amy wants more than this, right? She's not, you know, like trailer trash that she was pretending to be. And obviously we've realized that she can't be, like, she can't seem to live up to that either, because obviously her appearances got blown, and she obviously got robbed because of it. She's not as tough as she seems, and I think that that's one of the really great points of the movie, is that while Amy she's super smart and she has everything's planned to the T, but when things don't go to plan, she's not really as tough as she really seems to be. But then at the same time, her mind turns right away. She always seems like in the back of her mind, if something goes bad, she already had the plan B, C, D all ready to go. So while this was unexpected that she would be robbed by some kids, these friends-ish, quote air quotes, friends that she meets in this trailer park, she ends up, she obviously right away thinks about the next scene going the unthinkable, and she goes for this person which she claims had originally not been such a great person to her, to the police, but yet she still goes for him to help, and then she finds a way to manipulate him, kind of. But then it didn't really take much manipulating, because Desi wanted her in the first place, right?
Yeah. I think that was the thing. She always knew that because Desi is so hung up on her, that, you know, she could always go to him, because he would always be there for him, and he'd be willing to go along. He'd be easy to convince to going along with whatever scheme that she had in mind. And I mean, I really loved Neil Patrick Harris's performance in it. It was a real sort of change in pace, because until this point, I mean, he was in the Harold and Kumar movies, basically playing himself, and he was also carrying How I Met Your Mother along with Cody Smothers, which, I mean, that show was just being run into the ground at the point he came on to do Gone Girl, and it was basically his character as the womanizing Barney that was the main sort of appeal one, other than obviously the aforementioned Cody Smothers as the Canadian Robin. But that show was just painful to watch in its final seasons, as they tried to force this Ross and Rachel situation in there. But I was so surprised that Neil Patrick Harris had such dramatic flair, and it's such a stripped down character that he's playing here. It's nothing like I've seen him play before, but he just nails it perfectly. You totally believe that this is a guy who can, he can quote Proust, which is always a sign of a douchebag if people want to quote Proust, especially in French. It's all the wannabe pseudo intellectuals who get really hung up on Proust and 17th century plays and art, 18th century art, and it's like, oh, please. And it's funny that
I think that Gone Girl really. I'm sorry, I cut you off, but I think that Gone Girl really, in the case of Rosamund Pike or in the case of Neil Patrick Harris, really opens a lot of doors for them in the sense that they delivered some really surprising, unexpected roles. And Neil Patrick Harris, obviously, this opens him up to being able to play a series of unfortunate events on Netflix as, the main villain. And it's just, he does that role amazingly also. I love how he plays that role. But Neil Patrick Harris, you think about how he starts, right? Didn't he start his fame with Dr. Horrible?
He was in Doogie Howser originally. He was like a child star, and then it was through Howard and Kumar that sort of revived his career, because they had this whole running joke about how the two main characters are obsessed with Doogie Howser because he's a fellow stoner, and originally Neil Patrick Harris didn't want to do the thing. He thought he'd be taking the mick out of this role that he held so dear to him, and then he read the script and he thought it was really funny, and through there that he got onto How I Met Your Mother, and it sort of snowballed on from there. But yeah, he was in Dr. Horrible as well.
I think that was the first time I actually watched him in anything, so that was how I remembered him being.
It's really funny when you see him and he's plays these womanizing roles and stuff, and then you see him in real life and he's this happily married gay man who posts delightful things on Twitter about his kids and stuff. His Christmas tweets are always so memorable. It's sort of I spent 7 hours building toys and my daughter just wants to play with a broom. So they're just the most adorable tweets. I think only Shaggy 2 Dope of the Insane Clown Posse, and it comes from more adorable tweets from surprising people. Yeah, Insane Clown Posse talking about coaching the Sunday League football team is just such a surreal experience. But yeah, I think he's really good. But then again, everyone's very surprised in sort of casting here. Ben Affleck was considered box office poison when he's gone into this, even though I really love Ben Affleck. I think he's just can do no wrong for myself. But he'd been doing things like Geely, which, let's face it, you have a chance to work with your hot girlfriend on a film. That's probably why he probably took it on. And yes, it wasn't a great film. But he went on Joel Schumacher to make better movies, and at the same time it's always really bizarre because you had him and Matt Damon who always this double act, especially in the 90s, and everyone's oh yeah, Matt Damon's the talented one, and it's no, Matt Damon's not. Ben Affleck's the one you should be watching. I think when Ben Affleck went on to be focus on directing and do Gone Baby Gone and The Town, that I think people started realizing, and with Gone Girl especially, it's sort of I think it changed in a lot of people's minds what he was, and I think it did the same for so many people in the cast. When, as we said, about the same with Rosamund Pike, I didn't think she could play crazy as well as she does, and then here she taps into Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, and the Nicole Kidman in, I think it's to Die For, the Gus Van Sant film. She really sort of tapped into a lot of femme fatales in this film, and sort of took elements of those characters but went her own direction. So yes, while she's obviously got elements of Sharon Stone's character from Basic Instinct, and you can see that especially in the sort of the throat slitting sequence. She's very much doing the character on her own terms, which I think is always an important thing. You can't just mimic what you've seen in some other films. You've got to play crazy your own way, and I think there's just so many surprising performances throughout. But I think when we've looked at Fincher's filmography throughout, he's always made surprising choices when it's come to the casting of his films, and it's always paid off. Who'd have thought Meatloaf as Bob would be so enduring in Fight Club? I'm trying to remember who plays Angel Face again.
Jared Leto.
Yeah, again, who'd have thought that casting Jared Leto just for the sole purpose of destroying his face, it would be the great move that it was. But this is Fincher. He does what Fincher does.
Yeah, Fincher is, we've looked at this entire season, we've looked at his movies, and the progress that he's had is, I feel like he really does excel in making movies where, I mean, every single choice he makes is a bit surprising. Even the movies types that he does, the best movies he has is definitely more along the thriller kind of deal. Obviously, you have some runaway unexpected hits like Social Network, which I know you love a lot. So, I mean, this working out and having and choosing these characters, I feel, is good. I mean, especially at this point, I think it really helps that I sometimes wonder whether Ben Affleck had some kind of say in this whole thing, because I mean, at this point, I think he's already directed one or two films at this point, and if you look at something like Gone Baby Gone, it is very it would be a movie you could picture Fincher doing.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
I wonder if having that kind of experience going into this movie kind of changes a little bit of just how we view Ben Affleck at this point, and really kind of lands him this role, because if he's able to direct movies like this, then obviously he has kind of like that darker side to his character that of an actor that people can explore at this point.
Well, I think when it came to Affleck, I mean, Fincher really was fascinated with his sort of how he interacts with like paparazzi and the press, especially when he was having a high profile romance with Jennifer Lopez. It was for sort of being photographed all the time, and I think that was in particular what attracted him to casting Affleck in the role. Mm-hmm. And it's been obviously when they were like talking about the making of the film, that when it comes to casting roles, Fincher basically likes to go onto the internet to look through pictures of actors to help him try and find the right actor for the role. And it was when he was looking at photos of Ben Affleck they noticed that peculiar smile that Affleck has, that sort of really captured the emotion that Fincher wanted this character to play. And we see it, as I said, during that appeal for help sequence where the reporter says, ask him to smile, and he just unthinkingly just smiles, even though it's as stupid as all hell for him to be smiling.
It's like
that
the
thing.
Goofy smile.
That's right. And I mean, both Fincher and Affleck had a lot of sort of mutual respect for each other, and the fact that Affleck at one point he was like so convinced that Fincher as a director was like the only director he's ever worked with who could basically do any job on set better than they could. A point that he actually made by the fact that he changed the lens setting on one of the cameras just by the smallest amount, and he had a bet with like one of the crew members that Fincher wouldn't notice, and then Fincher basically brought up, he's like, why does that camera look a little dim? So I don't know how Fincher does it, but he's got such an eye for detail, and you hear it like when he's like the most minute sort of sequences, and he's shooting like 50 times with like this Kubrick like obsession of how all things go. And we saw it in Zodiac, the scene where Jake Gyllenhaal's character just throws down the notepad, and he shot that scene like 50 times just because he wasn't happy with how the notepad landed, just because he's constantly looking for how things should be shot and how they should look. And we see it as well, and just like how he lights the scenes, we see the return of those yellows again, which just look so nice. And just, I mean, he shoots on digital and he makes it look like he's shooting on film, which is no easy feat. And we look at other directors like Michael Mann, who shoots on digital, it just looks like garbage in comparison. So I really don't know how Fincher does what he does, but he just always seems to really nail that look for his films.
Well, I mean, he has a lot of, I mean, we've been looking at it the entire season, his little trademarks as a director that really helps him build on, especially because of the type of movies he chooses to make, that these trademarks really do help the movie visually. Especially, I think in this one, we had a lot of like blue hues and stuff like that also, and it's just the concept of how visually down to even how the colors in the scene and what's gonna pop out and what's supposed to blend with the background and things like that really subconsciously and visually really, like, I guess visually and subconsciously change the nature of the scene and how you feel about the scene. It builds an atmosphere, and everything is with Fincher is so visual, and he's such a master at creating it and really having that eye of how people are going to see this and how people are going to feel when they watch this, that it just really elevates the movie to a different level.
How did you think with the opening of this film? I mean, it was only on this time watching it. I mean, this is my fourth time, I think, watching this film, that I realized that the film actually opens at the end. And I only
You really? I tell you one thing. I am a huge fan. I think we've already, we've done a lot of movies that kind of start at the end.
Yeah.
So it kind of loops around. I love movies like that. Personally, I love movies like that, and I notice it. And I thought it was so genius to do it like that for this movie. It's great. Like, I noticed the first time I watched it. I saw it in theaters. Really? I loved it. I noticed it the first time. And I love how it does, because, I mean, the first scene, the last scene, and it's completely because after you've had an understanding of this entire movie, the meaning of what he says in that monologue of him questioning what, what's in her mind, what she's thinking or whatever, it just, it has this, because you watch this whole, 2.5 hour movie, it changes the context of what it means when he asks those same questions as the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a mind-blowing moment, and it's really amazing, because you suddenly, in the beginning, you feel like it's just, because you don't know who Amy is, and you don't know who Nick is. When he talks about, you sometimes wish you were, whatever, cracking open her head to see what she's thinking, how she's feeling, or what we've done to each other and stuff like that. You think about it, like, people say that sometimes when they're angry, or when and kind of like, just kind of like, oh, I'm curious about, I'd like to look at see what you're thinking, But at the end of the movie, when you say something like that, after we've seen everything, the whole context changes. And you're just like, now you understand why he's saying it. And the fact that, how is he going to it's more of like a despair, because now you kind of feel like, well, how is Nick going to get out of this situation? Because now there's no out with what they've done, like with where they are at the end of the movie.
Oh, it's definitely so. And I think only Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind has done it as well as this film does. Because normally when we have the ending at the start of the film, it's normally really sloppy and it's unneeded, but this time it's really sort of clever, and as there's just this surprisingly moment of verbal violence that we have. I mean, talking about unspooling your wife's brains during your opening moments of your film is certainly a way to grab your audience's attention, and certainly there's no sort of like a title card say, 4 days previous or anything like that. It just goes straight into the film. There's no reference to the time shift at all, which is really kind of clever, and that's why I didn't pick it up. I mean, obviously I'm clearly not as clever as Kim, who picked it up the first time, but
I have the perk of having read the book, so I notice the details more, right? Because I've already
But I mean, it leads me as well, and leads into when she returns home. And Nick's now faced with the fact that here we have a woman who's willing to slice open another man's throat with a box cutter, to manipulate evidence and people's perception, to the fact that the police are basically like, you got your wife back, what more do you want? There's this sort of like frustration, the fact that they know that they can't beat the case, and the fact it's been escalated to the feds, who have essentially closed the case as well, means that it's done. There's nothing else that can be done here, and he's now living with this woman who could potentially kill him, but the way she views it is that, no other woman is going to kill for you the way I did. And it's sort of like, it's almost like she wants to be celebrated for it's like this romantic gesture, the fact that she killed another man to create this life for them. But I think he really sells that sort of like this idea that you're living with a crazy person really well. The fact he goes and sleeps in the guest room and he's padding around in his socks to try and make as little noise as possible, and just essentially keep her as happy as and maintain this sort of like illusion of domestic bliss that they're supposed to be having. But prior to when we have the shower sort of sequence when she returns home and we get full frontal nudity from both Rosamund Pike and Ben Affleck, so exciting times if you wanted to see that. I love the fact that Affleck was basically talked into the scene by Fincher, saying he was going for a European feel, that he wanted to remove the vanity from these actors and to shoot it all warts and all, and I think it's just a really effective scene. It really portrays what we needed to do. It's not about gratuitous nudity or giving Affleck's fans something to talk about, which seemed to be a bizarre talking point. Whenever people want to talk about this film, they really wanted to talk about that. It was like the end of Wild Things and Kevin Bacon's nudity. I don't know. I'm never sure how to respond to people wanting to talk about actors' nudity on film, so
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the scene did its job. It showed a bit of, I don't know, vulnerability. It showed a bit of the fact that, they're obviously, there's no wires, there's no nothing, and that's it. But it also, it kind of aligned their relationship a little bit, that, even naked, they're not very, they're not very interested in each other. It's really just to talk out the details to make sure that they're not gonna, she's not gonna have any issues with this.
Oh yeah, and you can tell she's completely in control of the situation as well. The fact that, she commands him to pass the shampoo, and he does it like, instead of just like, get your own damn shampoo, he just does it because he's just like, basically knows that he's just now her lapdog. He has no control of the situation. She's smarter than him, and she can play the situation in because the press are all on her side. And he's essentially this guy that's been given a second chance to repair his marriage.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, I think that one of the best parts is that she plays the situation so well when she comes back that she's even able to kind of talk down on the cops, right? So the detective that was responsible for the case. She's been on this, and then she realizes all these issues with what she's saying. While she's being kidnapped by Desi, being her, obviously her version of the story, and she's seeing all these plot holes. But at the same time, she's able to play the situation where, if I didn't come back, you would have arrested the wrong guy, aka her husband.
Yeah.
So it means that she has this situation under control the entire time. And how she does it, I don't know. But, I mean, it's one of the fascinating points about Amy is that she's always ahead of you. She's already thought through every single situation every single angle of the situation that she needs to handle.
We see her around. I mean, she's certainly a ruthless personality who's willing to do anything to sort of further a story. I mean, we see her inserting a wine bottle into herself when she's creating these elements to sort of back up her fake rape claims that enable her to return home without any sort of major questions, and to sell this idea that she was kidnapped by Desi rather than her original plan, obviously, of sending her husband up the river. So, but no, I think this is a fascinating movie, and it's one that actually surprisingly stands up to repeat viewings. You wouldn't think that a film with Silver Lined on a big twist would hold up to the same as Seven in many ways. Seven you can just watch over and over again, and it's just fascinating to just take apart and see all the little details and how Fincher crafts this world. And I think the same can be certainly said for Gone Girl, which is kind of like, in many ways, him returning to the same sort of world that he did with Seven, and just like now as a sort of older and more experienced director, being able to just like explore darker themes again and just play around with a similar sort of world, really, of having a villainous character who's able to manipulate and ultimately win out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree, because I mean, movies, I think one of the main things going into this movie I was worried about is that it wouldn't stand up to a second viewing, because after my theater viewing, and I think I watched it maybe once after I bought the movie, and then this has like been a while, it's been a few years since I've seen it, and I was a bit worried that the ending, like rewatching it, I wouldn't like at this point would I still feel that kind of, that excitement about it. And it surprisingly did live up to how I remembered it, but knowing the twist and knowing all these things, it's still so fun to watch, in the sense it's because it's based on these characters, and you notice these little things about these characters, and those little, and the movie is paced really well. I mean, after a few movies of being, I guess, not paced too well in the last few that we've seen, it really does help that it's a different feeling, I guess, because if you talk about length, this movie isn't a lot shorter than his previous 2-3 movies. But at the same time, you really notice how much more enjoyable this one is to watch.
It was good to see Fincher doing another dark thriller, especially after The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I think The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo already had this sort of like expectation behind it, where when it came to Gone Girl, I don't think the property was as well known. I mean, obviously you're a fan, and it definitely had its fans out there. But for myself, I wasn't sort of aware of the book. I wasn't aware of like it having all this sort of hype around it. So it felt like a very unique property. And when we had all the promotional material of Amy's sort of corpse on the gurney being straddled by Ben Affleck, I think it was it's like, what the hell is this about? So there was a definitely air of not knowing what to expect from this one, and I think that combined with like the casting choices, it was just a pleasant surprise around. And I think it was actually on this watch I actually bumped up my rating. Originally I gave it a 4.5 on Letterboxd, and I bumped it up to full 5. So it's a proud member of that very rare 5-star club I have.
5 stars is definitely hard to get there, I think.
It's so hard to give a film 5 stars in my head. I know there's people out there who go give for like 5 stars away, but when I'm looking at films that I want to give 5 stars, it's sort of like got to have that rewatchability to it. It's not just about having that engaging experience the first time around. It's like, can I see myself watching this over and over and over again? Which is the repeatability which sort of like really sort of knocks the film into from being a 4-star into a 5-star. It's like Joker. I mean, I really enjoy Joker, but I can't see myself watching it all the time. So,
me neither.
Anything else you want to talk about? Obviously, brings us the end of our review of Gone Girl. I mean, before we obviously wrap this one up, I mean, further viewing, if you obviously like Gone Girl, what would you recommend pairing with it?
Well, I have 2 picks.
Okay.
The first is another Gillian Flynn adapted movie. I don't think it's a great movie. Let's just put that out there. I don't think it's a great movie, but I still think the story's pretty good. And it's 2015's Dark Places with Charlize Theron and Chloe Grace Moretz and Nicholas Hoult. And it has, I mean, Gillian Flynn is really great at writing these dark storylines, so this one does get a bit darker. I personally prefer her other movie, but that was adapted in a TV series on some channel that I don't get, so I've never seen it yet. But yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely a good one to pair with this one as just like a continuation of just watching Flynn's story come to, to the big screen. Other than that, I mean, I honestly, I could have gone with Gone Baby Gone, but I've already used that up in, I think, the last one and a few other picks for Fincher, so I'm not gonna use it in this one. But I think I thought about, because of how the movie is structured and how the timeline is structured, I thought that Memento would be a pretty good one to pair with this one. Just because that one kind of has that mixed up storyline where the plot kind of meets in the middle kind of thing, where the story continues in the middle and the kind of the end and the beginning kind of thing progresses, right?
Yeah. For myself, I've got a couple. First up would be Nightcrawler from 2014, another Jake Gyllenhaal film, where he basically plays this petty thief called Lewis Bloom, who realizes that he can make more money by becoming a nightcrawler, who are basically journalists who track down criminal activities and collect footage for the local news stations. And it's really this sort of evolution of this guy who starts off at the base sort of level, and how he sort of how his ruthlessness sort of gets him to the top. But it's an absolutely engaging performance by Gyllenhaal, and one that sort of first introduced Dan Gyllenhaal to the world, really, who also gave us Velvet Buzzsaw in 2019, which I really liked, but I think a lot of people were kind of disappointed because it wasn't the movie that they thought it was going to be. Another great film I would recommend as well would be Stoker from Park Chan-wook, his English language debut, again featuring Nicole Kidman, who we mentioned already. And obviously, speaking of Nicole Kidman, I would also recommend checking out To Die For from 1995, which was also one of those key inspirations I mentioned already for Rosamund Pike's character here. So I'd recommend checking that one out as well. Thank you.
Good choices.
So that brings us to the end of another season of Movies and Tea. Thank you as always for listening. But before we obviously close out the season, I think it's obviously best of as we like to do, to go back and look at the movies which stood out for us, our best, our worst, and that hidden gem. So Kim, what should we start with? Should we start with the best film or worst film?
Maybe hidden gem.
So what was your hidden gem of the Fincher filmography?
I mean, I think you pointed it out pretty well at one point. My hidden gem is The Game. Yeah, I mean, if you look at every other movie in Fincher thing, I mean, a bunch of them got, second half of his stuff almost all got nominated in the Oscars. It got a lot of attention. And then, if you look at the movies before, Seven is really popular, Fight Club is really popular. You have all these movies that are really popular, but then people always forget that The Game is by Fincher, or Alien 3. And, The Game is, obviously Alien has, whether you like it or not, Alien 3, whether you like it or not, you still have a general knowledge. I'm sure a decent amount of people have seen it. And that leads, after some kind of deduction, we're left with not too many titles. And The Game is one of those movies where I feel like it doesn't really get enough attention. Obviously, it has this mystery, this really extreme thriller deal to it. And this just really messed up game that takes Michael Douglas's character for a cross-border adventure. So it's really it is quite amazing. Like, that movie really it's kind of mind-blowing if you think back to it.
Oh, definitely. So I think The Game for myself also my hidden gem of the filmography. It's only aged like fine wine since its release, and it's only really got better since it initially came out. And I think it's the fact that we've not seen anything close to how it looks or how clever it is that sort of only makes it stand out. Combined with this, the fact that it's Michael Douglas playing Man of Power, what he does best, and some interesting support from Sean Penn. It's just a really interesting story and a fun thriller, just how it builds up to this idea of a all-controlling company that can basically come in and take control of your life and be untouchable at the same time. It's just how that story unfolds, how we see one character being broken down, just having everything slowly stripped away from himself, only to sort of get that wonderful final reveal at the end. And I think it's one of those films that when we looked at The Game on the show, and I found myself like for at least 2 days afterwards, like going on my film groups, like Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema and whatnot, and saying like, "Oh, has anyone seen The Game?" It's like, have you seen The Game recently? It's just really, you watch it and then you just want to go and find more people to talk about it because you forgot how good it is. So it's definitely I agree with yourself. It's this filmography. So.
So, yeah, agreed on that point. I have a feeling we have the same choice for the worst movie also. So what's your worst movie of Fincher?
The worst choice is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. If you're taking on a date to see, if someone takes you this as like their date movie, do not sleep with them. Just walk out and demand that they pay for dinner. This film was tedious to the max. It's 3 hours of overindulgence. It feels like, and I think as when we talked about it, you could hack out like an hour out of this film and it would make no difference. It's this idea of
it would make it more enjoyable if you hacked it.
Oh, probably.
I would have changed my rating if this movie was an hour shorter.
But yeah, just this idea that we have to cover every era of this guy's life just so we can get from point A to point B, it just became absolutely tedious. And even like the magic of Fincher couldn't sort of save it or provide anything interesting enough to sort of hold our attention for a full 3 hours, certainly. So
especially when, you know, if you haven't listened to our episode on Curious Case of Benjamin Button, you will find it that we actually found supporting characters a lot more interesting than the main character, which, you know, is a sign of, I guess, not such a great movie.
No, and I mean, there's obviously people out there going to say, you know, Girl with a Dragon Tattoo or Alien 3.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny with Alien 3 that when I was watching the trailer for Gone Girl again, some guy's review video popped up, and it's sort of like, oh, I'm not covering Alien 3 because Fincher's disowned it, so it's not part of the Fincher filmography. It's like, no, it very much is part of the Fincher filmography, and you are a cretin for not appreciating it. And Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I think as we watched ourselves, I mean, it's an adult thriller. It's not perfect, but at the same time, it was still enjoyable. And it certainly had some interesting moves compared to Benjamin Button, which just had nothing really happening for it. So,
I think with Benjamin Button, I think one thing became really clear is that Fincher is the best at doing, obviously, darker content. I'm not saying that Benjamin Button wasn't darker in content, because it had that, you know, fantastical twist, but it definitely wasn't the usual type of film that he did. It was more of a drama, and I think that when you do a drama like that, it's hard to, I think it didn't, the only thing that would help it was how the film was shot, and visually the movie was pretty nice to look at. But it was just the story itself that I think for me didn't work too well. But yeah, I mean, we're going to leave that to people who haven't listened to it or haven't watched it or whatever. I mean, you can go back, listen to our episode, that sort of thing. Yeah, so, I mean, now we move on to the best. What is your best?
The best is so tricky, because especially for anyone who's sort of like, who's had listened to me talk enough about film and know that I already had like a couple of horses in this race with just my strong opinions on it. So it was sort of like really sort of a toss-up really, between Social Network and Alien 3, for which is my favorite, which may be surprising. I mean, especially as I love Seven, I love Fight Club, but there's something about those two movies that I just return to time and time again. But as it won out Best Decade, and it won out here again, Social Network for myself is the best film of Fincher's filmography. I love that film so much, and it didn't deserve to be as good as it is. I mean, as we said on the episode, it's a movie about Facebook. This is a TV movie escalated to grander heights just because Fincher is the one lensing it, and it's still an astonishing film, and just one that I just find fascinating still, even after multiple viewings. It's still one that never fails to engage me whenever I see it. But what about yourself, Kim?
Mine was a toss-up, but not the two that you had.
I wasn't expected to be, especially with Alien 3. That would be a real wild card on your part. So
no, I really like Alien 3. I have no issues with Alien 3. But I mean that wasn't even near the bottom for me. So I mean, for me, obviously, my two favorite are the two similar movies, and that would be Gone Girl and Seven. One is obviously a movie that I really love and is more modern, and Seven is the movie that actually was the first movie that I watched of Fincher that really got me, like, really really like was so memorable in my mind. I'm not gonna lie, at this point, I mean, it really depends on the day. But after, having such an intense conversation about Gone Girl, I'm gonna say that that's my best based on today's mood. Like, tomorrow it might be 7, but today it's Gone Girl.
Fantastic.
It's just, I think the deal with Gone Girl is not only is it's a rare thing to have a good, like a really great thriller. And then on top of that, it's a really great thriller that I think that people who haven't read the book has the same kind of enjoyment as the people who have read the book. And that's really hard to achieve because usually people are more on the side where if you've read the book, you're going to have certain expectations of it. And if things don't go, obviously, I'm sure there are people out there who are listening to this who's read Gone Girl and probably didn't like some of the choices they made in the adaptation. I'm not, I have no problems with that. I'm just saying, for me, Gone Girl, I think, is an adaptation where I went to the theater with someone who hadn't read the book, and they still followed the story really well. And this isn't an easy story to adapt. It's very complicated. The storyboard must be like crazy complicated when they put this together. So, I mean, the fact that the person I went with, like my husband, understood this completely, and then for me, who's read the book before and knowing the twist, still got so much enjoyment out of it, and even on repeat viewings, I think that's just a sign of like greatness in a movie.
Awesome. So there you have it. There's our the end of our season of David Fincher films. We hope you've enjoyed listening as much as we've enjoyed going through the filmography. And I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to all our guests. Heather from Head at a Time, Nick Rehack from French Toast Sunday, also Norman from Flick Hunter. And it's just been an absolutely fascinating season to go through these films, especially as we all feel that we know them so well. So to actually go and deep dive into them and just look at them in order and see the evolution of Fincher as a director, it's been a fascinating process to go through. But as always, we'd just like to say thank you as always for listening, and make sure you do hit the like and subscribe buttons wherever you happen to be listening to us. Also, make sure you check out our Facebook and Twitter page. We're also on Instagram as well. And you can check out our full archive of episodes, including our previous season and Movies and Tea podcast.wordpress.com. But until next time, thank you as always for listening. Thank you to my co-host Kim. And we will see you soon. Until then, good night.